Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something you've likely seen floating around online, the Irish slaves myth.
That's right. This idea that the Irish were, the first slaves in America or treated even worse than enslaved Africans.
It pops up a lot. So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack that. We want to get into the actual history, the differences between experiences.
Exactly. And explore that really complex, sometimes contradictory relationship between Irish and African people over the centuries. We think showing why the words we use matter, why precision is key, is really important here.
Definitely. So first things first, let's clarify terms. When we talk about Irish indentured servitude or penal transportation, what are we actually describing? How bad was it?
Well, it was brutal, no question. We're talking about forced labor, sometimes under contracts lasting, say, 4 to 10 years.
Okay.
But also, especially during the Cromwellian conquest in Ireland, people were involuntarily transported, forcibly shipped out. They even had a term for it. Barbadosed.
Wow.
Yeah. Sent to the Caribbean, often Barbados or Montserrat. And the conditions. Incredibly severe. High death rates, particularly in the tropics. It was grim.
Sounds truly awful. But you mentioned, and this seems critical, it was legally different from chattel slavery. Can you break that down? What were those key legal distinctions?
Absolutely. And this is crucial. Indentured servants, however harsh their conditions, generally retained legal personhood. Their servitude was temporary, defined by a contract.
So an end date.
An end date, exactly. And it wasn't hereditary. Their children were born free. Plus, there was usually a promise, at least on paper, of freedom dues at the end. Maybe some land, tools, or money.
Okay. And any idea of numbers?
Sources suggest maybe around 40,000 Irish might have voluntarily entered indenture heading to the West Indies, and perhaps 10,000 or so were involuntarily transported, like those Barbadosed. Significant numbers, but compare that to African chattel slavery.
Right, and that's the stark contrast, isn't it?
Completely different system. African chattel slavery was perpetual, lifelong, and critically hereditary.
Meaning the children inherited the status.
Yes. Children born to enslaved mothers were automatically enslaved. Enslaved Africans were legally defined as property, as chattel, stripped of personhood, virtually no rights.
And this is explicitly racial, right?
Explicitly racialized. By 1640s, colonial laws were already defining the system by race using terms like Negroes and the scale. We're talking millions forcibly transported across the Atlantic over centuries, not thousands.
Millions versus thousands, a huge difference. So given these clear distinctions, why does this Irish slaves myth persist? It seems, well, deliberately misleading.
It is. Historians overwhelmingly label it pseudo-history. It's riddled with inaccuracies, like citing a supposed 1625 decree from King James II, who wasn't even born until 1633.
That doesn't quite add up.
Not at all. And beyond the factual errors, there's an agenda. The sources are pretty clear that its purpose is often to minimize the unique horrors and the systemic nature of black chattel slavery.
How so?
Well, it's frequently used by white nationalist or supremacist groups to dilute conversations about racial injustice. The argument often goes, see, the Irish were slaves too, and we got over it. It's an attempt to derail discussions about systemic racism and reparations.
A way to create a false equivalence.
Precisely, a dangerous false equivalence.
Okay, so we've established the brutality faced by the Irish and the crucial legal difference from slavery. But the story gets even more complicated, doesn't it? Some Irish, despite their own experiences, actually became part of the oppressive system.
Yes, and this is a really uncomfortable but important part of the history. While many Irish suffered terribly, some did manage to climb the social ladder in the colonies.
How'd that play out?
They acquired land, wealth, and yes, some became slave owners themselves. Sources mention Irish individuals becoming known as tough and efficient slave masters, particularly on islands like Montserrat, and involved in the trade in places like Nantes in France.
So it completely challenges that simple narrative of just being victims.
Absolutely. It shows the complexities. The colonized could, in some instances, become colonizers, or at least participants in the exploitation of others. It wasn't a monolithic experience.
That complexity extends way back, even thinking about interactions in Europe.
It does. You find evidence of Africans in Ireland as early as Viking Dublin, maybe around 860 AD. Much later, though, in the 20th century, you see a different, troubling dynamic.
Look what?
Some Irish missionary movements working in Africa actually adopted colonial attitudes. They used language about African inferiority in their fundraising, even talking about purchasing little black babies.
Wow. The irony is stark.
It really is. The formerly colonized, echoing colonial ideologies. It's complicated.
So back in the Americas, you mentioned they sometimes worked alongside each other initially, on plantations.
In the very early stages, yes, you might find European indentured servants and enslaved Africans laboring in similar conditions. But that changed rapidly with what historians call the racialization of labor.
Racialization of labor. What triggered that shift?
Economics, mainly. Think about the Barbados sugar boom around the mid-1600s. Sugar was incredibly profitable, but brutally labor-intensive.
Okay.
The demand for permanent, controllable, and cheap labor skyrocketed. Between roughly 1638 and 1653, the enslaved African population in Barbados exploded from maybe a couple hundred to 20,000.
A massive increase.
Huge. And as the legal system solidified chattel slavery as hereditary and racially based, it became more economical for planters to rely solely on enslaved Africans, rather than temporary European indentured servants. White servitude was phased out in favor of black slavery.
And these tensions continued later, didn't they? Like with 19th century immigration to the U.S.
Definitely. When large numbers of Irish immigrated to the U.S., especially after the famine, they often found themselves competing for the same low-wage jobs as free black communities, particularly in northern cities.
Leading to conflict.
Tragically, yes. Economic anxiety fueled racial animosity. The most infamous example is probably the New York draft riots in 1863, where Irish mobs attacked black people in institutions. For many Irish immigrants, assimilating and gaining acceptance meant emphasizing their whiteness and distancing themselves from black people, essentially buying into the existing racial hierarchy.
A really difficult period. But the relationship wasn't always antagonistic, right? You mentioned moments of solidarity later on.
That's true. History is rarely just one thing. By the 20th century, especially during the Civil Rights era, you see connections being drawn between struggles. Activists in the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Movement were inspired by the Black freedom struggle in the U.S.
Any specific examples?
A well-known one is Bernadette Devlin, a prominent Irish civil rights leader who actively expressed solidarity with groups like the Black Panthers around 1969-1970. She saw parallels in their fights against systemic oppression.
So wrapping this up for you, it's clear this history is incredibly layered. You have shared suffering, legal distinctions, economic competition, and then also moments of connection and solidarity. Not straightforward at all.
Not at all. It's a narrative full of contradictions. Irish indentured servitude was brutal, but distinct from chattel slavery. And some Irish people participated in the system of slavery. Understanding this complexity is key.
And understanding how the distortion of this history, this Irish slaves myth, serves a purpose today. It really challenges you to think critically about how narratives of victimhood get used, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it just hammers home how vital historical accuracy and using precise language are when we talk about race, identity, and justice, both in the past and right now.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.